Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We're in our third session of Ecclesiastes as we are looking at ancient wisdom for today. And as I was thinking about Ecclesiastes this week, I thought about, Ecclesiastes reminds me of someone who has been, at night, they can't go to sleep and they're restless. And they're thinking through all of the things that they're trying to sort out and figure out. When we're in that kind of state, we wonder, today was a good day, but maybe it was a bad day, or things aren't going the way they should. I turned 40 this past year, and people in my age group, some of y'all have been there. That you start to question things at 40. Am I who I want to be? I'm midlife. I got maybe 40 more years, maybe a little longer. But, in ministry, I've learned people at this age, they question their identity, or they want to be with the people they want to be with, are they at the job they want to be with? And it's one of those existential things that happens that most people do. And Koheleth is the teacher, the wise person, but he's the person at night that can't get rest because he's thinking through these things. If you've ever been around people that can just fall asleep, my dad could just fall asleep. I've learned I can do that now, but what's funny is he snored. So anybody that snores always seems to fall asleep before anybody else. That's me now. But as a kid, it would just bother me that he could just go to sleep anywhere, anytime. It's like he didn't worry. There's been seasons in my life where I've gone to bed and I can't go to sleep. You just toss, you turn. You toss, you turn. And reading Koheleth reminds me of somebody in the middle of the night who's gotten up after they've tossed and turned for a week and decided, okay, I know a lot of things a lot of people don't know. I've got things people don't got. Why can't I sleep at night? Why can't I find rest and relaxation? And it's almost as though they've taken all that they've experienced, observed, and wrote down their restless night. And that's kind of the way it is, because if we met Koheleth, even in a restless night, you're not always that way. I can be like Koheleth some days, and some days I can see half empty cup as half full, and everything's good. Kind of like the Lego movie, everything's wonderful. You sing the song. So Koheleth is, and he's also coming out of a tradition where if we look at the Old Testament writings, which is the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, you've got Proverbs on one side that is all about wisdom. And it puts wisdom up almost on a pedestal right under God. That, God's wisdom, understanding of things the way they are, is almost getting a glimpse of who God is and what God's doing. And Ecclesiastes says that kind of wisdom, in many ways, the more you get it, the more you look at the world and realize your life's short. You can't attain everything you want. Last week we talked about how much we know today versus 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And in many ways, the more we know about ourselves and the world around us, the more we realize the more we don't know and the less control we have over the world around us. So we get this idea almost as that we get some omniscience that God has. We know so much, but we don't have the power that God has to be able to control it. And Koheleth has a fraction of what we know about the world around us. And he still is restless, because he can't control anything about it. He sees the cycles of the world around us, and he realizes, I'm just a breath in all of this. I'm a drop in the bucket. So you've got wisdom over here, and then if you read the Song of Solomon, like Koheleth will talk about the pleasures of youth. If you read that, it's some people want to make it just a symbolic metaphor, but it is poetry about romantic love that happens at a season in life. I don't think too many people at Golden Age are going to pen that kind of sonnet of And he says, we live in between this kind of wisdom and this kind of youthful, and a lot of times you don't really know how good it was until you get older and you can't enjoy it anymore. And he lives into this. He lives into these kind of things, and he realizes for those that are young, they don't enjoy it because they don't know it's never going to last. And for those that have wisdom, the reality is, even if you have it, you can't just give it to the next generation. They've got to learn it for themselves. And it doesn't necessarily make you any happier. So he's wrestling at night with these things, because he himself, who has everything, who's done everything, who knows everything, we'll put those in quotation marks, he's restless. If we were to think about, some of the geniuses of our world today, the more they know about things, the more they realize they don't know. Most of us, the more we know about things, the more we realize we don't know. If you're a doctor, you learn about the body, but there are things you don't know. You don't know how to cure this or how to fix this. So let's continue to read. We'll pick back up in chapter 6. And chapter 6 kind of is a bridge between two thoughts. One, continuing that social critique that he's already been giving, and then going into, and I think we did read some of chapter 6, but we'll go back and just kind of read over it again. There happens, and I'm doing, again from Low Fink, but if y'all want to go back to a different translation, we can. There happens one evil which I observed under the sun, and it weighs heavily on individuals. God gives someone so much wealth, holdings, honor. He lacks nothing of whatever his gullet desires. But God does not empower him to eat because a stranger eats it. There is a breath and an evil disease. So there's a person, he gives another example of a person who essentially has everything. He not only has wealth and holdings, he also has honor. People respect him. And he lacks nothing of whatever his gullet, his basic desires have. But God does not empower him to eat it because a stranger eats it. So this is someone possibly that he has everything, he probably dies, but has nobody to leave it to. So who's going to take it? Well, somebody else will. You think about somebody that maybe doesn't have children, and they die, and they don't have an heir. Where does that stuff go? Kind of state. Somebody else enjoys it. This is a breath. It is an evil disease. If someone, so the juxtaposition of that is someone that has 100 children and lives many years, so that his life is really long, and in his prosperity cannot serve to sate his gullet, even if no grave awaiting him, I say still a stillborn is better than that person. So this is a person who has tons of children, has lived a very long life, but it doesn't have the ability to even what? Satisfy. So you got one person who can satisfy but has no heir. This person can't satisfy but has 100 children. At the end of the day, he says it'd be better just to have died at birth. Now he's exaggerating. I hope. Yeah. But the idea is, what good is life if you can't what? Enjoy it. If you can't enjoy it because you don't know where it's going to go when you leave, or you can't enjoy it because nothing ever satisfies you, and you got everything everybody would want. Either way. Jesus does a similar thing in Luke's Gospel. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus tells the parable of the rich man, and we'll just turn over to Luke real quick. Let me find it. Okay, let's see. 12, verse 16. So in chapter 12 of Luke, beginning in verse 13, we'll start there. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who sent me to be judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to him, "Take care, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Now, in Jesus' day, most people, like Koheleth's day, would have thought if you had things, that was a sign that you were blessed by God. And Jesus says, life does not consist in the abundance of possession. Then he tells them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Now the reality is he does. He's just got too many crops to store. And it's funny. I have no place to store my crops. Then he says, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones." So I don't have any place to store them, but I do have barns that stores them and are full. I will do this. I will pull my barns down, build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, "Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." So the relax, eat, drink, and be merry is the very thing Ecclesiastes is a proponent of. But for this man, he can't do it until what? He has everything he wants. But God said to him, "You fool, that very night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" Very similar to Ecclesiastes. You've got all of this stuff. You die, whose are they now? You worked so hard for them, but you couldn't enjoy them when you had them. And part of what Jesus would also say in Luke, because he's very economical, and you didn't share out of your abundance. You just kept it for you. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear." Now, for people in Jesus' day, most people living in Galilee woke up every morning, and some of the things they did was to tend their crops to make sure they had enough to eat. They baked daily their bread. And for the most part, the women every day mended clothes. It was a daily practice of making sure you had what you needed for that day. And Jesus says, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, about your body, and what you will wear, for life is more than food, the body more than clothing. And then he gives the example of consider the ravens, and then consider the lilies of the field. And he says in verse 32, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He says, "Sell your possessions, give alms, make purses for yourself that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes nor no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be." He said, "Be dressed for action and light your lamps." And if you continue to read, in Matthew's gospel, this idea of not worrying about things comes in the Sermon on the Mount. And in Matthew chapter 5 or 6, let me see where it's at. He ends that little discourse about not worrying about what you eat and what you drink with this command. Let's see. "Therefore do not worry, saying, what will we eat, or what we will drink, or what we will wear? For it is the Gentiles who strive after all these things. Indeed, your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things, but strive first for the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and these things will be given to you." And he says, "So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today." So Jesus, in many ways, standing kind of on the steps of the wisdom of the Old Testament, reminds his audience, like Koheleth reminds us, is that if you focus on the things, then you don't live in the present moment of enjoying what God has provided in front of you. Part of that is in your abundance to share with others, Jesus would say. But also the reality is both the rich in the parable, the rich man in the parable, and the poor audience he's talking to, both worry about the same thing. One, their abundance they worry about, or their non-abundance. And both of them live their lives without the focus on what's more important. And part of that's just enjoying life. I mean, if it is a gift and you don't enjoy the gift, then it's kind of, what's the point? And that's easier said than done some days. So I get that too. Picking up in verse 4, because as a breath it came, into darkness it passes, in darkness its name remained covered. Moreover, it has never been observed or perceived the Son, so it is at rest wherever he is not. And if he lives 2,000 years but does not taste happiness, do not both pass to one and the same place? All human labor is for the jaws of death, and the gullet is never satisfied. What profit for the one who knows over the fool, or what for the poor, however perceptive, in making his way among the living? Better to have something before your eyes than to have a hungry gullet. That too is a breath and an inspiration of air. Whatever has occurred, it was already called by name, it was already perceived. And each one is only human, and he cannot fight when someone's stronger than himself. So the reality is, you could live an unknown amount of time. If you weren't happy and content, would it be better not to have had that much time? You know, which is better? A short life that is happy or a long life that is miserable? That's a hard, that's quality versus quantity. And beginning in verse 11, a little bit of a shift in thought happens. There happen many words that only multiply breath. Of what profit are they to a person? For who perceives what is better for a person in their lifetime during the few living days of one's breath, which one carries out like a shadow? And who can tell anyone what occurred afterward under the sun? Better a name esteemed than a scented creams, and the day one dies than the day one was born. Better go to a hall of grieving, to the festival hall. Since this is the end of all humans, let those who still live lay it to heart. Better vexation than laughter, for a troubled face are hearts hardened aright. The heart of those who know is a hall of grieving, and the heart of fools is a hall of joy. It is better to listen to the criticism of one who knows than to become fans of the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of a fool. But that too is a breath, because blackmail dulls the wit of the wise, and the bribe leaves understanding astray. Better the outcome of anything than its beginning, better as an air of caution than the air of impatience. Don't be blown about in an air of your vexation, for vexation is at home with the belly of fools. So in a very poetic way, he gives us what begins to think is almost like, why would these things be better than these things? So it is better for him, he says, a better name esteemed than scented creams. And the day one dies than the day was born. So he essentially, of these two things, which is better? The day you were born or the day you die? It is better to go to the hall of the grieving than to the festival hall. It's better to go to the funeral home or the party. Okay? Since this is the end of all humans, let those who still live lay it to heart. Better vexation than laughter. So better the person that ruminates on things and worries about things than those that laughter. For by a troubled face our hearts hardened aright. The heart of those who know is in a hall of grieving, and the heart of fools in a hall of joy. It is better to listen to criticism of one who knows than to become fans of the song of fools. For like the crackling thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of a fool. So he gives these kind of two extremes, and it's more of an idea is that in the place of the one who has died, in the place of grieving, in the place of one at the end of their life, they know more than the one at the beginning or the one that's in the hall celebrating. And so it's almost an extreme of, at the end of your life, you know more. You have been more. You have done more. When you're young, you take it for granted. One is about respect. The other is about the fool. It's better to listen to criticism of one who knows than to become fans of the Song of Fools. Now, it's not necessarily those that are having a bad time versus a good time, but which of those two places are you going to find people talking about what matters most? And the reality is, we don't like going to the funeral, but it's at the funeral that we learn what? What's most important? Not at the Star Bar. You know, the person that is at the funeral is the one that is wise and will tell you what life is like. It's better than the Song of Fools, those that are at the bar drinking and caroling and in merriment. Now, he's not saying one over. I mean, he's going to talk about eat, drink, be happy. But the reality is, if you have to look at two places in life, if you go to the place of the grieving, they talk about what's most important. He says, blackmail dulls the wit of the wise, and the bribe leads understanding astray. Better the outcome of anything than its beginning. Better an air of caution than the air of impatience. Don't be blown about in an air of your vexation, for vexation is at home in the belly of the fools. Do not ask how it came about that earlier times were better than present times. Every generation thinks that. I'm going to be honest with you, when people talk about the good old days, if it didn't include air conditioning, I don't want to hear about it. I talked to people that lived in the good old days that didn't have air conditioning, and they agree with me. I like air conditioning. I know
My mother used to say, the good old days weren't so good.
Yeah. You know,
She made that
I'm going to say some stuff to Lily when she gets older, and I'm going to talk about the good old days. But I talked to Amber yesterday. We were walking, and we were talking about childhood, our childhoods and Lily's childhood. And I said, I hope Lily looks back and thinks of these as her good old days. You know, whatever this is for her, I hope that when she talks to her children, that these are good days for her. You know, every generation is going to look back with nostalgia. I love the idea that the early use of the word nostalgia comes out of World War I, and European troops were, it comes from actually what they thought was a mental health issue, because they were missing home during the war, and it started to spread from troop to troop to troop. And that was not too good if you want to send them out to war. So nostalgia in that mindset was a dangerous thing to begin with. Now we sell it. We sell it like candy. You know, you can go places and you can go to Cracker Barrel. You can buy nostalgia at Cracker Barrel. The candy. I bought my mom for her birthday candy from when she was a child, and she just loved it. She probably didn't even enjoy eating it, but it was just something she had seen. You know, we don't have cable like we used to, but I remember when TV Land first came on, my dad loved it. We sat and watched shows that he watched growing up, and his shows were better than our shows. I watch shows now, and I think they're better than what's on now. So, I mean, every generation. So he says that, you know, if you think it's better than present times, then you're not, what? Enjoying what? The present moment. And there is some truth that nostalgia can be a bit of a hindrance, and I wouldn't call it a mental health issue, but it can be. It can be a crux to enjoying the present. For such a question will not make you appear knowledgeable. Knowledge is as good as an inheritance, and even more profitable for those who see the sun. For one who shelters in the shadow of knowledge is also in the shadow of money. But the profit from perception is the knowledge keeps its owner alive. So for Koheleth, knowledge is not just the idea of knowing things, but how do you use what you know to make your life better. But note the actions of God, for who can make straight what is bent? So even with all of the knowledge we have, even with all that we can do, for Him, you can't change anything in what we talked about, that cosmology of the world that is in a cycle. So when we think, one translation might say crooked, what is crooked? Think of a wheel. You know, creation kind of moves in that kind of, and it's kind of at a what? It's at a bent. And God has made things that we would want to straighten out, but God has made it in such a way that we can't what? We can't circumvent it. I mean, you can't get rid of being born and dying. We'd want to straighten that out. I mean, we try. We've got people that try to be younger. We try to get, you know, everything that happens in life, we try to what? At some point, and in the 21st century, we do a lot better job than they did 3,000 years ago. But we still can't make everything the way we want it. It is the way it is. On a happy day, take part in the happiness, and on a bad day, take note, God has made the latter just as He made the former. So the humans can find out nothing about what comes afterwards. The reality is, as much as you do in this life, Koheles says you won't know what comes after when you die. That doesn't mean we don't make it better for the next generation. But the reality is, I mean, you know, I don't want this to sound political at all. But when I look at politicians that are really old on both sides of the aisle, and they're making decisions for the world that they're not going to be in 10 years, it bothers me. At some point, you got to say, let somebody else make a decision on what's going to affect me, my children, and their children. You know, because at some point you say, just let go of it, because you can't control the future after you're gone. And maybe it shouldn't be in your hands. And Koheles is kind of giving people permission. Enjoy what you got this moment, because you don't know what's going to happen after you go, how it's going to be used, what's going to be done with it. In my days of breath, I observed both cases. It happens that a law-abiding person, despite the law-abiding, comes to a bad end. It happens that a lawless person, despite the lawlessness, has a long life. This is very similar to the big question in the book of Job. Why is it that good people suffer and bad people prosper? What does he say? Don't be altogether too law-abiding. What does your translation say? Verse 16 of 6. Yeah. No, we're in 7? Yeah, we're in 7. Chapter 7, verse 16. Let me see here.
Don't be over
righteous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself?
Yeah. So mine says, do not be utterly, altogether too law-abiding. So the idea of righteousness is abiding in God's commandments and law. And don't profit too much from what you know. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be utterly lawless or unrighteous or become totally ignorant. Why should you die before it's time? It is best you hold on to the one without losing grip of the other. A God-fearer, in any case, will escape both dangers. Now, I'm just going to be careful, you know. We might not agree quite with Koheles, but Koheles is saying, don't be too rigid. You know, part of it is the people that are overly self-righteous, but also overly, you know, almost in a Pharisaic kind of way, abiding by the law, by the letter of the law, sometimes keeps you from what? From doing the right thing or enjoying life. You know, I grew up in a very stricter, my parents weren't, but the environment I was much more stricter in terms of how do you live as a Christian. And once I found out about grace, and I found out that, you know, you can be happy and not scared all the time? It was nice. It was really nice. I enjoyed.
It was freeing.
It was not just freeing. I was able to love God for God rather than to love God because I was afraid. And there's a big difference. If all you do is try not to to do the wrong thing, and your life comes to an end, you didn't really enjoy much. And the truth is, those that don't fall in, and he's not talking about lawlessness like breaking the law that we have, but these people that are overly religious. And then there are some people that aren't religious at all, and they live a happy, long life. And he says, in the in-between is probably the best place to be. Don't be too righteous, don't be too unrighteous. Jesus would probably agree in some ways. He would say, let righteousness come from a better place than just following the letter of the law or the traditions. Let it come from a place where you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind and your strength, Deuteronomy 6, and to love your neighbor as yourself. If you do all of those, they fulfill the law, the prophets. He would say, let love be the guiding principle of your life, rather than just following the law because you think you have to follow it, the way I grew up. For one knows knowledge is a protection more powerful than the 10 rulers who have dominated the city. And yet there has never been a human on earth who is so law-abiding that he did what was right without ever sinning. And don't listen to everything people say, for you will never hear someone under you speak critically of you. And yet you clearly perceive that you have often spoken critically of others. So part of what Koheleth is saying is lighten up a little bit. If you're on top, nobody's going to ever tell you that you're doing a bad job. But you've told people that others have done a bad job, so you know you're not doing everything right. And don't pretend that you've never sinned. Part of the thing is that all of us, even as followers of Jesus, we're both sinners and saints. And we're sinners because that's just who we are. We resist God's will for our life over and over again. And we're saints in that we have come to follow Jesus, we love God, and we want to be the very people God's created us to be. And most of our lives, we are kind of living in the in-between of both of those. We're never fully here. We're never fully here. We're somewhere in the middle. Hopefully we're moving towards the sainthood. But there's days where we take a couple steps back. And part of the love of God and the grace of God is that God loves us both when we're here and when we're here. But that love motivates us to go closer to over here. So for me, Jesus would say, if there's something bothering you about somebody else, why don't you remove that big log out of your eye before you start poking somebody else's speck. So before you start criticizing somebody, know that people are probably criticizing you too. In all ways I tried having knowledge. I said, I will study to become learned, but knowledge remained distant from me. Distant whatever has occurred in the deep, in the depths, who could ever find it? So I turned, my mind turned me around. I wanted to perceive through exploration and search out what the knowledge is, which is reckoned from specific observations. Moreover, I wanted to perceive whether lawlessness was connected with a lack of learning and ignorance with delusion. Again and again, I find the claim that womankind is stronger than death. Because she is a ring of besieged towers, and her heart a net, her arms are ropes. One blessed is the eyes of a God can escape from her. One whose life has failed is taken by her. But look at what, in observation after observation, I found, said Koheleth, until I eventually found the final reckoning, or more precisely, how constantly I searched and found nothing. Among 1,000, I could find one human only, but the one I found among them all was not a woman. Look at the one thing I found. God made human beings straightforward, but they have gone searching for all sorts of reckonings. What then is the one who knows, who perceives the sense of a proverb, the knowledge of a man makes his face radiant and his stony features soften. But I, to the contrary, be attentive to the orders of the king, because of the oath you swore before God. Do not withdraw hastily from his presence, and do not insist on something if it threatens to have an evil ending. Whatever he finds interesting, he will carry out, since behind the word of the king there is power. Who can ask him, what are you doing? So Koheleth is continually to talk about some of the things that he is searching for and thinking about, and I got in trouble for going over last week, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. One of the things he's looking for and searching is knowledge. Moreover, I wanted to perceive whether lawlessness was connected with the lack of learning and ignorance with delusion. So if you go back to Proverbs goes over and over again that wisdom will help you lead a better life, and he wants to know, can knowledge and wisdom make you a better person? And the question would be, do we think that's true? And Koheleth says again and again, I find the claim that womankind is stronger than death. And part of what he is talking about is that if you go back to Proverbs, and we would consider some of this a little sexist language, but what entraps most men, even if they know they shouldn't do it, they know better than, a beautiful woman can what? Can make the most wisest, knowledgeable man. She is like a siege of towers, her heart a net, her arms are ropes. One blessed in the eyes of God can escape her. One whose life has failed is taken by her. So even a man who what? Knows everything, is knowledgeable, a beautiful woman can what? Can take it all away. So for him, even knowledge isn't a secure enough thing to say that you can't what? Be righteous. Because, and it could go for a woman just as much as a man. You know, people are entrapped by what? Not here, but a lot of times here and other places too. So we will finish Koheleth next week. We'll probably have to kind of skip around a little bit to get to the end. We just got a couple more chapters left. What I'd like for you to do is to kind of look back over Koheleth this week in terms of the next couple of chapters. And chapter 12, verses 9 through 12 is really an epilogue to it. And it kind of, what Koheleth hasn't said the whole time, he says at the end, or is said of him at the end. We have to read that almost backwards and to think, okay, even though Koheleth has had a restless night, he knows at the end of that night, whether he gets sleep or not, he's going to pray to God. Because God is what? In control. And all the restlessness that he has, the realization is, I'm not. And even if he's restless about all this, he knows that he needs to live the way that God would call him to live in his community, in his life. And for us, as we wrestle through Koheleth, we look towards Jesus in our restless nights. In our dark nights of the soul, we know that on the other side of it is resurrection. There is hope. And for us, we'll kind of put the Koheleth in terms of a Christian perspective more next week. Gracious God, we thank you for the day. We thank you for our time together. We ask that you'll be with us this week, bring us back together, and help each of us in the nights that we wrestle with big questions, that your Spirit can come and bring comfort. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.